Good morning and welcome to the latest in our Move to Portugal virtual roadshow. Today's webinar is about buying property in Portugal, and as many of you have indicated that you intend to rent before you buy, we will also be covering renting in Portugal. We'll start off by looking at how you can find a dream home in Portugal, the popular areas, for experts on how to find a home, as well as the attractions of the different areas and the current state of the market. So we'll then cover financing your purchase with a Portuguese mortgage, how to manage the foreign exchange risks if you're using funds from the UK or elsewhere, rather than funds already in euros. We'll look at the buying process in Portugal, how it differs from what people may be used to in the UK. I'm Nigel Les, I run Expat Network, and we're joined today by Luis da Silva of Portugal Property Finders, amongst a number of other businesses, and he will take us through these points. So we're here to answer any questions you may have, so please submit any questions using the link on your screen. We'll answer whatever we can during the webinar, and any that we miss we'll deal with by email afterwards. So send those to us at Expat. If you want to, have any questions after, especially if you're watching the recording rather than this live, then send it to me at expats@expatnetwork.com. Okay, and so we'll start then, and over to you, Luis. Perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about yourself, your businesses, and the areas that you cover.
Yeah, of course. So if I may, I'm actually going to start today's presentation differently to yesterday's by sharing something, and I'm going to just share a couple of pages of our corporate brochure because it's easier to explain what we do this way. So our group, a little bit about us. Don't worry about me, I'm kind of irrelevant in the context. It's more about the business. So our business was founded in 2014, and we have a multilingual team located in the main destination regions with a greater emphasis on Portugal, though we do have some coverage of Spain as well. We get inquiries from around 75 countries, so people looking at moving, in this case, to Portugal. And we work currently with around 30 nationalities of clients. Many of them are considering full-time or part-time, extended part-time living in Portugal. We get, last year we had over 3,500 inquiries for a different range of services, including renting, buying, and whatever you name it. And then importantly about us, and this is important in the context of this presentation, is that when you're setting out to find somewhere to stay, which is the context of this presentation or this webinar today, you need access to a whole range of additional experts, accountants and lawyers, and people who might help you import your car and whatever. And we provide that sort of access. So we've become, in a sense, a leading international property finder, which is something I know we'll talk about in terms of the methodology for finding locating properties, by virtue of the fact that we believe very strongly that the buyer should be represented in a transaction. Now, if you use Spain as an example, in locations in regions like Valencia, you actually have this sort of buyer-seller split. But in most regions of Southern Europe, you have a listing agent that represents a seller, and the buyer goes largely unrepresented. And so we really focused on addressing that. So in terms of who we are, sometimes people get confused, and as you mentioned correctly, Nigel, we're sometimes known by different brands, and those brands focus on a certain area of the business. And so this is just an overview for the people listening to what they can find with us. So we have a UK business, which is Senior Living Villages, and that caters for investments and so on in the UK. We have two main brands in Portugal Senior Living and Algarve Senior Living, that cover respectively the Algarve and the rest of the country in terms of a range of services, discovery tours, and additional services that are typically focused mostly on pre-retirees and retirees. We have a brand in Spain called Spain Senior Living. In Portugal, we have a focus on the D7 visa, which we talked about yesterday, And that's via a site called Move to Portugal 101. So people want to do things like get their what do you call it? Get their bank account open, fiscal numbers, and all that sort of stuff. The focus of today's conversation is around our property finding business in terms of the responses, propertyfinderportugal.com. And then we run the largest, so we operate rentals and sales. We already have the largest portfolio of medium to long-term rentals in the south of Portugal. It's on a site called algarvelonglets.com. And then we're also on a small scale, a developer, and we're developing the first early stages of developing the first independent living retirement type community in the south of Portugal called Luz Living. So that's a little bit about us, and hopefully it helps to set the context. Now back to the questions.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. We're very lucky to have Lewis with us today because he's obviously very busy.
Indeed.
And indeed,
lovely to be here.
And I think that is very much the case at the moment with the sort of property side of things, where there is a large interest, and I know in Spain and in Portugal that is about Belgians, Dutch, Germans, Scandinavians as much as Brits. So obviously we've had Brexit, we've had pandemic and the travel restrictions. So what's happening in the market at the moment? So perhaps you could give us a flavour for that, the Portuguese market at the moment.
Yes, so the Portuguese market is extremely tight at the moment. There's distinctly a lack of product, and what we're finding is that most agents are extremely busy. I don't know if you've heard, Nigel, but last year was, excuse me, in sales terms, was the best year in real estate sales in the history of the Portuguese real estate market, 2021. So it beat all records, despite it being the second year of the pandemic. We also are facing the biggest shortage of inventory in living memory. So agencies are reporting, listing agencies, so the agents that actually carry the stock and go out and find the sellers and so on, they are reporting a shortage in some cases, or being down in some cases around 40% on historical inventory levels. So to put that in numbers, we spoke to someone who has, strangely enough, an inventory historically of around 1,000, so the numbers are easy, and they were around 600 at the moment. So they literally lost 400, because remember, a lot of these agencies are not selling, they're sort of multi-listings or multi-company listings, so they don't have exclusives. The exclusives are quite scarce in the market these days. So every time someone sells something, it comes off the books of multiple agencies because they're all showing it. And so the result of this company selling and other people selling meant that they were at about 40%. One of the big sites, the Idealista, which is also big in Spain but big in Portugal, they have actually recently published an article that has said nationwide the inventory is down by 10%. So remember that takes into account the very popular areas where probably that's down by more, and the less popular areas, maybe inland or whatever, where that's actually down by a lot less. So I think the message coming across is clearly in the market is that there is a shortage of inventory, and the prices continue to go up. So we had a Q1 year-on-year increase of around, depending on the region, 9 to 13% versus 2021. And again, this applies to properties for sale. Properties for rent took a slight dip, I think 1% in Q4 of last year, but this year they were up 3 or 4% in the first quarter. And the tendency really in the popular areas is for prices to rise. I'll give the audience a bit of an example. We're working for a client in Cascais. And they are American client. They are renting. They've been renting for about a year and a half. So they had a D7 visa, renting for a year and a half. We found them apartment, because we use a finder service for rentals as well in that region. We found them an apartment in a closed condominium in Cascais, a very upmarket condominium. They were paying 2,800 for a 3-bed, 2,800 euros. They wanted to renew because they were getting a bit nervous. They want a long-term commitment in Portugal. So they were looking at renewing. And when we looked around the market, firstly, there was hardly any inventory. And in their particular condominium, there were only 2 beds. So we wanted to go back and negotiate an extension with the owner. When we got benchmarking on the prices, the average prices of 3 beds in that condominium had gone up to 3,600. So from 2,800 to 3,600. So you can see, I'm not saying that's normal, but what is happening is the effect of a lack of inventory is having clearly an inflationary effect on prices. I will make one final comment in terms of the planning, because this is absolutely essential, whether you're buying or rental, but I'll use rentals as an example of this. During the pandemic, because the inventory was all over the place, the tourism had fallen out of the market everywhere. You know, it wasn't just Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and so on. A lot of the people, the owners who had properties that were operating on a short-term basis, so a weekly basis in the summer and maybe sort of the odd winter rental, a lot of them, because their revenue had dried up, flipped into the long-term rental market, because it was a market that remained stable because it's underpinned by people with essentially a permanent nature of their stay. Now, as soon as restrictions started to be lifted, sort of around the turn of the year, and countries opening up and the vaccine program apparently successful in keeping the new strains in check, a lot of those people moved back into the short-term rental market, which again dropped the inventory levels in rentals. And we are seeing this year a huge, but I can't tell you how large, a huge number of people thinking that they're simply going to pitch up and find a long-term rental starting, let's say, in May or June or July or August. It's just not on. You know, that inventory has moved to the short-term rental market. And the point I'm making is that people need to plan ahead, given the current shortage of inventory. They need to be planning about 6 months ahead in terms of their rental start dates, because otherwise they will be finding themselves in a very difficult situation in terms of the availability, and in terms of property finding, for example, for a purchase. The same rule applies, not with the same time period, but you must plan ahead, because in all the recent searches we have done for clients, around 1/3 to 2/3 of inventory, it does not exist when you drill down. You know, the property portals are showing false inventory, stuff that has been sold, you know, conflict in information. You get on the ground and then people are saying that it's been sold last minute. So all this in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is that the situation is very, very tight in terms of inventory in the property market, and it's a seller's market more than a buyer's market at the moment. I would say you need to choose with care.
Okay, yes, and we had very similar messages in terms of the Spanish market as you're giving here about Portugal. So thanks very much for that. And that then leads me into sort of how do you sort of go about, you know, sort of finding and buying a property.
Yeah.
What we traditionally say is that, you know, many people will look at those portals, but as you say, because of the multi-listing, because of the current situation, quite often you'll see something on there and say that's you know, interesting. It can give you a flavour for the prices and the availability, but you can't rely on it for actually being available. So how should people approach finding property in Portugal? And obviously you are a property finder, as you explained, rather than an estate agent in traditional terms. So how do you help, and how does the process differ from the UK?
Okay, so Let me explain those two and break that out. Just as by way of background to those listening, the reason that we decided some years ago to establish ourselves, and I must tell you, Nigel, and the people listening, that we found great resistance in the market to this concept of property finding, because local agents were very wary of, of someone being independent, so it's been a process. But the reason we did it is because we as a business, and maybe to explain to you listening how this works in your favor, we as a business do not know where an inquiry will come from and what area it will relate to. And the only way, realistically, that someone can provide a service everywhere is to have a model where you work in partnership and collaboration with other people that are effectively everywhere, because there are even the large companies in Portugal don't have a presence everywhere. They have a franchise presence, perhaps across different regions, but it's not a single owner that actually is everywhere. So if you want to be able to deliver a service across an entire country, for example, you can't do this realistically alone. And that was the driver. Now, Portugal is different to the UK, and how is it different? So if you look at in the UK, you've got large portals such as Rightmove, Zoopla, and so on, but you've got a very strong presence of local agents. And pretty much the combination of that will cover 100% of the inventory. Okay, you often go to a local agent. They do a lot of in the UK. They will have their domain, if you will, their regional physical domain, and they will cover that area. In Portugal, although the process is similar, I think the difference is often, if you just use the UK as an example, people from the UK must put themselves, in order to understand the Portuguese process, in the shoes of someone who is from outside the UK looking at finding a home in the UK. They can't compare the process to themselves looking as English people in the UK, because that's different. And this is where the challenge lies. If you're a foreign person going to a country like Portugal, you've got to figure out how to navigate this market. So, and that's much more challenging when you're not on the ground. So you're absolutely right, Nigel. The starting point is these large portals. You kind of get a sense of how things work. But the big problems with those portals is there's a lot of outdated information. So often the listing agents even purposefully keep the inventory there, as especially in low inventory scenarios like at the moment. They keep the inventory there to attract people to get in contact with them, in order to then sort of cross-sell them or say that that's not available and try to present something else. It's kind of a lead generating mechanism for that. What the portals also don't show are the potential problems in properties. And we have found in Portugal, over the years, this has improved tremendously, but we have found this year and last year, back end of last year, that there were a lot of listings with what we call the illegal bits. You know, the pool hasn't been legalized, there's an extension to the garage that hasn't been, fully registered, and things like that. And you actually only get a sense of that when you drill down and ask the listing agent about those details. So the portals are great for a starting point, but they can be very hit and miss in terms of actually validating what's available. You also have the problem that because a lot of these listings are free for individual sellers, and many of them are local people that don't speak necessarily great English, if you're finding any listed by owner listings or sold by owner listings, then communication with those owners typically is a little bit more difficult. So having someone on your side as an intermediate, shall we say, to try and communicate is often of great use. To come back again to the differences, the process is hugely. I want to talk a little bit about rentals, because you've asked me about how the process differs between the UK and Portugal. So buying, you'll eventually need to get in touch with local agents, and if you go the traditional route, you will use the portals, and then you will have to go and get in touch with maybe a dozen or so, or sometimes more agents, asking for listings. They'll send it to you, and you have to go through this entire filtering process yourself. Most of the time, that's not that efficient, especially if you are looking across multiple regions. So if you know exactly where you want to buy, then using the portals and being in touch with local agents can work quite well because you're focused on your search. But if you are looking and you're not quite certain of whether you want to be across two different towns in totally different locations or different regions, then it's not fair on yourself and it's not fair on the local agents to be trying to ask people to send you listings across different regions, because only one person's going to get your business, and at some point someone's going to figure out that you're not focused yet, and therefore they're going to give up on you. So you're going to be a bit frustrated by the process. So a bit like the UK, where your local agent is not necessarily, unless they're a big franchise, big chain, they're not going to be working 2 towns down. The same thing will apply, broadly speaking, in Portugal, not as much as Spain. Spain is a lot more focused, even smaller dynamics there in terms of focus on a town. Portugal, similar. I would like to use the rentals as an example of how the UK and the Portuguese market are so different, though, because I think it's in the rentals that people will find the biggest differences. There is a huge, sorry, I should just jump back. The big difference also in terms of buying a property in Spain, in Portugal and in the UK, is that there is no chain, there's no rule of a chain. The concept of a chain in Portugal doesn't exist. So in the UK, your sale is effectively dependent on a range of criteria outside your control, which have to do with the ability of other people upstream or downstream, depending on how you look at it, to be able to sell their own properties. And the whole thing can fall apart like a pack of cards or dominoes when one of those falls. That's not the case in Portugal. If you take the decision to buy and the seller takes the decision to sell, if you have to still sell your own home or whatever else, if you've made a commitment to buy, the seller doesn't care whether or not you still want to sell your home. You can't make it dependent on something else unless the seller specifically agrees to those terms in the promissory contract. You can't do that. You've got to commit to a purchase only when you're ready. And this is of particular importance for 2 reasons. And I don't want to overlap with what the folk are going to say tomorrow, but there are 2 reasons. The first is the Portuguese market is at the moment moving very quickly. So if you're coming from the UK or anywhere else for that matter, and you still have a home to sell, you should not be starting that process until you are in a position to go, because you will burn your bridges and waste the time of the local agents doing a search, and the inventory will change completely. Unless you're literally about to close, I would hold off on engaging with a lot of local people because it's a waste of time. And the other thing is, if you are looking at this in the context of residency, you do need to take some tax advice, which we're not covering here. To start tomorrow's topic with someone else.
Actually, next week, actually.
Next week. Apologies. Next week. But you will need to consider things such as selling your permanent residence ahead of actually moving out and taking residence up somewhere else, because those have tax implications. So the message there, I know it's been a long answer, but it's important to get the details there from the purchasing side, is you do need to consider the details, and you will need probably a couple of experts, tax experts, as well as property experts accompanying you. Now, in terms of the rentals, rental market is also very different. The first thing that I would say, and I won't repeat my point about the lack of inventory, is that the due diligence in Portugal, even though some people complain about it, is nothing compared to the UK. In the UK, for example, if you are a renter, and if you are a foreign renter, you will have to jump through huge number of hoops to be able to get a rental in the UK, including the fact that the rental agency effectively acts as an extension of the Home Office in vetting whether you have the right to actually remain in the UK and undertake a rental. So there's a kind of almost an additional validation step that goes on by the rental agency. You have to prove income and so on and so forth. Things that in Portugal for the foreign or expat market often do not happen. So the process of finding and getting a rental in Portugal is looking for a rental in the way that you best can. Same process as the sales. You'll go onto the big rental sites, and then you'll portals, and then you'll drill down to specialist sites like Algarve Longlets in the Algarve or whatever else. And then you need to try and find, either do a visit or not. A lot of rentals, especially for visa-related rentals, are being done at a distance. And therefore, it's important for people to try and get either a virtual visit in or a physical visit in, depending on whether or not they can come out for a physical visit, which from the UK normally is quite possible. And then what I would say here in terms of the methodology is that whereas in the UK, you are literally looking for a rental, and rentals don't hang around very long in the UK. Most residential rentals, they will turn around in a month or so. That's the same process in the cities of Portugal. So Lisbon, Porto, and so on. You want to be looking for a rental around a month and a half before your start date, realistically, unless you have a visa. That's a different scenario again. But in the tourist regions, you want to be planning ahead around 6 months or so, Nigel, because what happens is there's a seasonality. And so it's no use you sort of coming along and saying, I want to start in July, because anyone who doesn't have a long rental already in July is renting it by the week to tourists in the summer. And so what they want you to do is they want you to start a rental after the summer, let's say in September, October, and then take up their winter months as well as possibly the next year's summer months. So the planning here in terms of rental is absolutely fundamental, because to get the timing right is crucial. Okay, so those are the some of the differences. And of course, we would say this because we're property finders, but we believe in the methodology. We would say that having a property finding approach, even if you use a property finder or you don't, but having a property finder approach is really the way you need to go about doing things in a market like Portugal, in today's dynamic market. You need to go out there, find someone who can help you get to as much of the stock or the inventory in a shorter period of time as possible. And you will never be able to do that because you're not an expert in the market. You don't have the contact, you don't, you're not on the ground. If you don't know exactly what region you're dealing with, you're going to have to build those relationships. And that's impossible to do efficiently from a distance, and if you don't know the people, and moreover, if you don't speak the language, for example. So that's a little bit about the methodology and the difference. I can talk a bit about what we do and how, but I know there's a question, so I don't know if you want to take the question first, Nigel.
Well, no, let me just, comment. I live in Javier in Spain, and but I think the experience is similar. I've had sort of two at times when I've looked at Spain. For the time we looked to buy, we used an agent, a property agent, and it was very clear in retrospect that they were taking me to the developers that they had a special relationship with, rather than showing me the full range of properties that were available. And indeed, a sale fell through due to a lack of communication between the agent and the owner, because he was saying one thing to me and another to the developer. So I think that sort of working with a property agent, you always have to remember they do get paid by the seller, and although there are many good ones, there are also occasions when that conflict comes in. And the second is when we looked for a rental, and I went through the portals. I went and booked appointments with individual agents, and in the Javier region, that meant pretty much one property, one agent. And so trying to get over a sort of period of 4 or 5 days appointments set up was very difficult, and several of the properties by the time we got there had gone. But it does sort of lend itself. I'm not wanting to promote your services directly, Lewis, but the property finder who does that work for you can be very important.
Yes.
So yes, let me just sort of pick up on that question we've had, and that is, can you be gazumped in Portugal?
You can, and it was something that didn't happen at all in the past, and in the last I would say year or so, year and a half, gazumping has risen. It's still not very, so for those of you listening who don't know what that is, that's sort of someone beating your offer at the last minute, you know, and sweeping you away when you think you've got the deal closed, whether that's a rental deal or a purchase deal. So although still not very common, where it is becoming increasingly common is that typically when a buyer comes along, and let me use the purchasing example, when a buyer comes along and you find a house that you like, you will make an offer on a property, and that offer is typically a little bit below the asking price, or, you know, somewhat below the asking price. These days, the days of 20-30% discounted offers, people won't even consider those offers, so don't even bother doing that in today's market. But when you make an offer and then you think you're in negotiation with the seller, and they tell you that they're you know, they're committed to dealing with you, and there is a period between having an acceptance of an offer in principle and actually going to the promissory contract, which is the first sort of formal legal step of logging out the process. And you can be gazumped by someone who, for example, will come along and offer a higher price. That's the most obvious scenario. The second is someone who offers different payment terms. So if you're a buyer that needs a mortgage, for example, and you say that your offer is going to be conditional to a mortgage, the buyer is more interested in just getting rid of the house. And if somebody comes along and says they're a cash buyer, then they would probably be better positioned to gazump you. And the third is if you build in some sort of conditions. And I will use an example here, which actually for me is a bit of a tricky one, because we would always recommend that the buyer not move ahead with the purchase. I know it sounds really strange, but we do this from time to time. And that is when we find we've lost periodically, or we suspended a process the second half of last year to an American couple that were looking for a Quinta style, you know, sort of a rustic property. We found one, and then we always ask the listing agent several questions. When we came to the visit, our team member and the client was surprised by the declaration of the listing agent that there were a number of illegal bits to the house. So that meant that example I mentioned, the pool. I think in this case it was literally the pool and the garage, or then extension or whatever. But the difficulty with this is that the seller would not take responsibility for legalization, which for us is completely unacceptable. You're either, if you're selling, you need to be able to commit to legalize the property before you hand it over to the new owner. But because it was such a tight market, our buyer, under advisement from us, put in as a condition, a precondition, that they wanted the seller to resolve those issues. You know, they would go and exchange, pay a deposit, but then they would give the seller time to resolve those issues. But our buyer was gazumped by someone who was prepared to accept the illegalities in the property. So there are different forms of gazumping, if you will, and those are three examples that I've just sort of mentioned there. I do want to add to your point, Nigel, about your particular experience, which is not unusual, and to explain a little bit about why people who look for either a property purchase or a rental have these difficulties. If you, and the reason why a listing agent will try to guide you, shall we say, for the lack of a better word, to their inventory. You must remember that in a lot of these Southern European markets, the people actually doing the selling, so the real estate agents, are working on commission only. They get no salary. They are literally reliant on selling their real estate in order to survive. And therefore, if they have to share their commission with anyone, the amount of money that's available for everyone in the transaction is naturally lower. And therefore, the problem with the listing agent and many of them are very professional, but the problem with the model in a low inventory, high demand scenario is that the listing agent is tempted to first push their own product, which may or may not be that appropriate first, So in addition to it being a waste of time for you as a potential buyer, because you may be sort of being encouraged to see things that are actually not a fit for you anyway, it takes more time, and you could be losing out real opportunities because you're dealing with agent A, agent B, agent C that is trying to sort of show you their stuff, and in the meantime you're losing opportunities. So it's really, really important, even more important in this kind of scenario, that when someone like you, Nigel, goes to a market like that, probably at that stage it wasn't as contested a market as it is today, but today you probably would have gone straight to a finder and said, listen, help me out, I need to see everything I want to see within 3 days so that I don't lose any opportunities. And that's where they would help you, really, realistically.
Yeah. Well, even myself, who runs a portal for expats, I only became aware of some of those property finder services once I'd arrived in Spain. So hopefully people will understand those benefits. So perhaps we could now sort of move on to look at the Portugal and the attractions of the different areas, what sort of properties you can get there, and so on.
Okay. So can I share my screen with you again then? I think I have a couple of slides on this. I think it's this one. I'm not sure why the slide is not maximized. Let me just maximize the slide here. Sorry, I've got the wrong. No, I don't. Sorry, I've got the title of yesterday's presentation, but this is the correct presentation. For a moment, I looked at the slide. I will come back to that if it need be. So forgive the maps, they're a bit small, but I wanted to go, I thought it would be useful for the people listening, Nigel, for me to go through a few of the most popular regions within Portugal, because probably 90 or even more % of the inquiries that historically we get and that come into the market are focused on these areas. And I've just taken a sort of north to south type approach. So the Silver Coast is something that many of you will have heard of. It's broadly speaking a region or an area between Lisbon and Porto, not the entire area, but a big chunk of it. It covers towns that you may have heard of, such as Nazaré and Peniche and Caldas da Rainha and Torres Vedras. Anyway, Óbidos, which is not a big, but it's actually small, walled city, very famous medieval sort of walled city. So those are the sort of names that might arise. Sometimes there's a bit of confusion between the Silver Coast and the center. So the center, or centro as we call it in Portugal, is a sort of swathe of the country that goes from coast to the Spanish border, and it incorporates the Silver Coast. The hint is in the word coast, of course, which is this is the coastal area of that region. And the reason that it tends to be popular, in particular with Brits, is that in the past, the Silver Coast was seen as the cheaper option to the Algarve. Okay, so a lot of people who could not afford the Algarve decided to move to the Silver Coast because property was a lot cheaper. That situation has changed. I'm not saying the Silver Coast is more expensive, but what I am saying is that difference in price, in particular for prime locations in the Silver Coast, so those near the sea and so on, there will not be that substantial a difference between that and the prices you pay in the Algarve. So beware of this distance, those who still live with the image of the Silver Coast as the sort of cheaper version or the cheaper cousin of the Algarve. It's got a great position between Lisbon and Porto because it's an advantage in terms of accessing either airport. So you can either go an hour and a half up to Porto and fly from there, or you can come down an hour and a half, depending where you are on the Silver Coast, to Lisbon and fly out of Lisbon. So in that sense, you have this variety, and especially if you're, again, for our UK audience, especially if you're flying back to the UK, A lot of the low-cost flyers fly out of the 3 main airports in Portugal, which are Porto, Lisbon, and Faro in the Algarve. And so, and they don't all service the same UK airports. So sometimes, you're better off flying from Porto to Birmingham than you are from, and you can't get from Lisbon to the East Midlands, for example. So that might be a factor for you in terms of accessibility to another European market. The same thing happens. Porto will fly to northern Italy, but Faro will fly to Belgium and the Netherlands, for example, whereas Porto will not. So you need to perhaps factor this into your thinking, and this area provides a bit of access to both areas. It's got a very famous coastline. You'll all have heard of the sort of those large monster waves that people are surfing and breaking world records on. It's perceived as much more authentic as well than the Algarve, but not as much as the north. So the north, so Porto and Braga and so on, are known as the sort of the cradle of Portugal, even slightly further north, because that's where Portugal's roots were created. A lot of history there. There's a sense of history in the Silver Coast as well. So if you want access to that sort of history and historical culture, even sort of religious culture and so on, places like Fatima, the Silver Coast is a good place to be. The towns are generally smaller and more manageable. So if you're not a city person, then a region like the Silver Coast works well, because the dimension, the size of these cities, even the largest cities like Caldas de Rainha, probably has a couple of tens of thousands of people and no more than that. English may not be as spoken as widely, especially inland, and the property prices, especially new build on the coast, has experienced huge inflation due to foreign buyers. So foreign buyers, people like you listening to the presentation, have in a sense contributed to the inflationary effect. So just to let you know, I am going to go through a few slides, and this is important in terms of the context. So because then I'll come to a slide where I actually compare the prices of what you can expect across the different regions. But I thought if I explain the context of the regions first, it would be more useful for people to understand. The second region I picked out is the Lisbon, Cascais, Estoril coastal area. Hope that is minimally legible. So for those of you who are not fully aware, but Lisbon is actually not on the ocean. It's actually on a river, the Tagus River, the Tejo, as we say in Portuguese, Tagus in English. So it's at the river mouth. And it is Cascais at the end that is actually on the Atlantic and is the sort of entry level or entry point into the river. And the area between it is called the linha, literally meaning line, and often referring to the train line, which is it's one of the loveliest urban or suburban train lines you'll find. It goes on the coast between Lisbon and Cascais, about a 30-minute train ride, very pleasant. And all the way along that, there are a range of real estate options to rent or to buy. Now, Lisbon itself is hugely popular short-term destination as well as long-term, but in particular short-term. It's been voted Europe's best cruise destination, weekend break, conference, city break. I mean, you name it, it's won tons of awards. It's got an existing expatriate population, so number of expats of different nationalities, languages, and so on. English is very widely spoken. I say quite, but I would say it's very widely spoken, and an excellent mix of historical, traditional and modern real estate options. So you will find everything from the typical house that has been refurbished to the new build modern, where they've taken down an old property and rebuilt a new building to the most modern sort of standards. You will find refurbishment where they've kept the facades maybe and refurbished the inside of the property. So a huge mix of the type of real estate from an architectural perspective. It was the most popular destination for Portugal's Golden Visa program. We talked about that yesterday in terms of the changes, but around 6 billion worth of euros of real estate have come in, and a lot of that has gone into Lisbon, and in the second instance into Porto. And Lisbon continues to undergo huge redevelopment, and prices continue to rise constantly. I mean, there's no sign of abatement in terms of the price increases. It is really the first choice for those who want access to culture and as a base for long-haul international travel. So Lisbon is still the hub for international, intercontinental, I meant to say, travel. If you want to get to North America, if you want to get to Latin America, to Africa, to Asia, and that is part of your plan in terms of travel, and you don't want to do an internal hop, then really you want to be based around Lisbon, because it is the Lisbon airport that's going to provide that international, intercontinental exposure. There's plenty of European coverage from the other airports. And it's also the place where there's the best variety of specialist healthcare choices, like hospital, clinics, and so on. So that is a factor for some people. The Algarve is in the south of the country, as most of you probably know already. And this is not, it's no longer the world's or Europe's best kept secret. What makes it stand out, amongst other things, is that it is really the domain and the dominion of the retiree. It doesn't mean to say that we don't have digital nomads, families, we have all of these, but it really is a standout location globally as the best place in the world to retire. And it's won this accolade from different sources year after year after year. There's one organization in the US that's given this the region the accolade 8 years in a row now. So it's beaten places like Panama, Costa Rica, Bogotá or Medellin in Colombia, Thailand, so on, even places in Spain. So very, very much a popular place. Great beaches, golf courses, marinas, existing expat population, and it's the place with the biggest amount of expats. So if you want to rent or live and you want to have access to other expats, especially if you feel that you may not be able to learn a new language as quickly as someone else, and you want to be able to converse in English, the Algarve is a great location. Access to fresh seafood, for example, fantastic. We still think, real estate prices today, to be very fair, are nothing like they were 5 years ago. You could still find the odd bargain or several bargains in city centers and so on 5 years ago. Those days are gone, realistically, they're gone. But we still feel that in terms of the relation between value for money and price, the Algarve stands out very well, especially if you're an investor or if you're looking at spending part of the time in a property that you buy and then renting it out. The Algarve is still probably the location where you get the best equilibrium between risk and reward. And a little known fact, we try to get that word out, but for those of you who are thinking of moving to Portugal and buying using the Golden Visa, not moving to Portugal, but getting residence in Portugal using the Golden Visa, it's a little known fact that the Algarve actually has a couple of low density areas on the coast. So that's worth noting. So I just wanted to now come back to Nigel's original question, which was this one. So what can you find? And, obviously I can't go through thousands of listings and whatever, but I've got a little slide here on the difference between the different regions and what you can expect to find and get between the different regions. And I've used a 2-bedroom apartment as an example, because that is really the example that best allows you to immediately see where you fit in, and you can sort of extrapolate this to a purchase and so on and so forth. So 2-bed apartment for purchase or rental. Apologies, I've actually done both examples. If you're in the north, and by north I mean Porto, Braga, Viana do Castelo, that sort of thing, on the coast in the north, cheaper cost of living, history and culture, colder and rainier, increasing rental regulation in the town centers, and prices in Porto are now quite high. So 250,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. When I say 2-bed, please don't take that as 2 beds. I mean 2 bedrooms. Some people have asked me in the past, oh, do you mean 2 beds in 1 bedroom? No, when I say 2 beds, I actually mean 2 bedrooms. just to be clear. You can find a 2-bed apartment for about 800 euros a month in terms of rental, plus utilities. Utilities are usually paid extra in a contract. If you're buying a refurbished property, probably a little bit cheaper, 225,000 upwards. And the 350,000 golden visa has now disappeared in high density areas. So we still get people asking about it, but you can't find it because it's no longer eligible. The Silver Coast, the one I pointed out a little bit earlier on the slide, it's cheaper. History, it is windier and the sea is very cold. Modern properties around 220,000. Traditional, you can still find some things, clearly not with a sea view and things like that, but for around 100,000, it's still possible to find some things in that order of magnitude. And a long-term rental, 750 euros per month is reasonable. Perhaps even a little bit lower than that. Cascais and Estoril, so cosmopolitan, existing expat community, expensive for sales and rentals. 2-bedroom property, 350,000, and you will have absolutely no change out of that. Probably even a little bit higher now. 1,350 for an absolutely normal, mundane 2-bedroom. Anything a little bit better than that, and you're looking closer to the 2,000 euros per month. The Linha, as I explained, the area between Lisbon and Cascais, easy access to both, great transport infrastructure. Really, you do not need a car at all. One of the places in the world, in Europe, and Europe has many, where you really do not need a car, as long as you find a property obviously close to that transport infrastructure, but there's a lot of it. Prices are rising fast because people have seen that Cascais and Lisbon on the edges have gone up so much, and they've gone to this center bit, and now they're finding that they're facing the same difficulties. Realistically, 225,000 is an entry level for a 2-bedroom apartment. 900 euros per month is probably a realistic entry level for a 2-bed apartment rental. Lisbon itself, so if you want to buy historical property, very quick moving market, high price per square meter, strict rental regulations for short-term rentals, and 300,000 entry level, so a little bit less than Cascais, because there are more neighborhoods. It's a bigger city, and around 1,500 a month in terms of rentals. So lower to buy, but higher to rent. The Algarve, top tourist destination, highest number of inquiries, very sunny place, large expat community. 175,000 for a 2-bed is still achievable, I would say, realistically, and 900 euros per month is still doable, although becoming increasingly scarce. And the only final point that I would make after this rather long intervention there on this bit is that please do not ask your local agent, whoever they may be, or a seller, for discount or for a discounted price point when you're expecting a premium location. A lot of people sort of come along and think sort of Portugal, oh, it's all the good old days. I want a sea view and I want to pay 100,000 euros for a property. You know, it's impossible. Just can't do it. So please be realistic. You'll stand a better chance of getting what you want if you know the starting point and do a bit of research into the market. So yeah, that's an overview, Nigel, of the main areas.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Lewis. That was very useful and interesting. Perhaps we can now sort of move forward and start perhaps with the sort of mortgage side. Many people will finance their property from funds back in the UK, from the sale of their UK property, but some will be looking to get a mortgage in Portugal. How does the mortgage process in Portugal, again, sort of differ from the UK and from what people might be used to elsewhere in the world? Okay, so a key thing in Portugal is that a mortgage is always granted on affordability. So the banks have a rough formula. You can probably scribble this down if you're listening, which is that they do not want your esforço or effort, literally translated, to English, to exceed a third of your disposable income. So if you do a rough calculation, which is you take your gross income,
a regular monthly cost, so anything that you regularly pay out per month, and you'll get a sort of an amount. They don't want your mortgage in Portugal for a property to be more than a third of that. Now, clearly, that becomes problematic at times. One of the differences between the UK and Portugal is that in the UK, again, it depends on many circumstances and aspects, but in the UK, if you are purchasing a property, and if it has any element of a rental, you know, you may be using it for yourself, which is not that common, but you're either using it for yourself part of the year and then renting it out part of the year, or you're renting it out, you can use the rental income as a way of motivating or justifying the mortgage. You're getting effectively sort of a buy-to-let mortgage, that sort of concept that exists in the UK. That doesn't exist really in Portugal. The Portuguese banks do not want to know about other income which is not seen as regular and consistent. Okay, so that's the first big difference. You will need to prove, and regular and consistent doesn't mean that you've had a tenant in a property for 10 years. They don't really care about that because they see rentals, for example, as being something that could go away overnight, where you then could still be stuck with the costs of that investment property elsewhere. So often, you know, you should be just working on the basis of your salary or pension and your sort of living expenses as the basis for applying for a mortgage. So that's the first big difference, is you need to be working with someone like a mortgage broker to make sure that you're using the right sort of information to justify your application. In terms of applying for the mortgage, it's actually very simple. The interest rates are low, although of course interest rates are going up at the moment, and I think the tendency with inflation also rising is for interest rates to continue to go up. We've seen the end of maybe a 7-year sort of period of very low interest rates. But still we're looking at a couple of percent, you know, between 1.5% and 3% in terms of interest, and therefore it's still very affordable, and anyone can pretty much qualify as long as they can afford it on the basis of the affordability. I know that you're probably going to ask me some questions about age and so on a bit later on, but pretty much the loan to value standard would be 70% loan to value. So this is it's all pretty standard stuff. And again, I would emphasize people should use a mortgage broker because they will scour the market for you and find your best deal. Sometimes if you want to make sure that they are doing a good job, if you've opened a bank account, you can always get your bank to quote you for a mortgage as well and compare it to what the mortgage broker is doing or has found you. But in most instances, they have more access and more contacts than you will have, a bit like the property finder, and so they should be able to find you better deals.
Okay, and talking about that loan to value, a number of people here have been saying they're retiring to Portugal, and so older buyers, do they tend to get a lower loan to value, and are they able? What age are they able to take a mortgage out to?
So a very good question, actually, Nigel. So there are two critical ages here, if you will, 65 and 75. And actually, it's got nothing to do with the loan to value. The loan to value could be the same because the affordability criteria will apply. But what is often requested, there are a few banks these days that are not doing it, but most banks, especially for older applicants, will ask, and that is, banks will ask for a life insurance policy because the reality is that at 70, you're much more likely to die than you are at 30. You know, that's just the reality of life. And so they will ask for a life insurance policy. And therefore, the difficulty with obtaining mortgages is actually in relation to the life insurance policy. So 65 is the last date at which you as an applicant will be able to compete in the open market with anyone of any other age. Between 65 and 75 is the period where you will have more limited options as an applicant, but you can still apply for a mortgage. And usually banks will then not be willing to consider mortgages beyond 75. please take this as a general rule. There are sometimes exceptions, but that's the general rule. So really, if you're applying for a mortgage after 75, and most people they don't want to be encumbered at 75 with a responsibility of a mortgage. What you'll find is most people beyond 75 who want a mortgage are very hard-headed, hard-nosed investors who recognize the power of and the benefit of using leverage on their real estate as part of the return. But that's going to be a bit of a limitation. I would add one point to this, and that is there are several potential workarounds to this. I don't remember. I actually responded to this point to a client the other day because they were a bit frustrated that they were finding few options, and I proposed three things. I think I can remember the three, or at least two. One was that they were actually married and their spouse was a lot younger. So we recommended putting the mortgage in the name of the spouse and they act as a guarantor. So that's an option. The second is they ultimately, anyone who has children, you know, what we're doing, part of our raison d'etre, or the rationale for what we're doing, is we're going to leave this brick and mortar stuff to someone else who can enjoy it one day when we're gone, and therefore that's likely to be the children. So you may anticipate this and actually get the children to apply for the mortgage, and then do a private agreement with your children, depending on how much or how little you need that agreement. You do a private agreement with them that you will repay their mortgage, because literally you're still paying for it. And the third is you release equity in your home country and you make a cash purchase. So you're basically paying a mortgage off or an increase in your mortgage in your home country. You've just got to be a bit aware of the currency fluctuations, and you may need to take some action to make sure that you're not unnecessarily exposed in terms of currency fluctuations. But those are some of the workarounds that you can get, or that you can use when you're getting sort of to the more advanced ages.
Okay, thanks. And when obviously looking for property, it can be very useful to know how much you can borrow, so that you can be realistic about what you can afford. Is a sort of approval in principle something that mortgage brokers or rather mortgage providers will generally provide you with?
In our experience, the answer is probably more no than yes. So another big difference to the UK, where you can get an approval in principle. And the reason for this is normally the mortgage, the banks, if you go direct to a bank, they will want an address. They won't actually get out of bed until you've given them an address of a property against which to do this. So with a mortgage broker, sometimes what happens is we will work as a property finder, and we will narrow down the scope of the options, and then we will provide the address of one of the properties in order to get an indication in principle of what the sort of loan to value is that you'll be able to achieve, the property values and so on. So the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. You can't just do a blanket approval in principle using your what do you call it, your income, but because the banks typically would only then give you a quote based on an actual address. That's the way they work. So you sometimes kind of use, I wouldn't call it a fictitious address, but you use a kind of one of the candidate properties, and then you get an idea in principle.
Okay, so obviously when people are using funds from the UK or elsewhere and buying in euros, then there's the foreign exchange risk. I think I would just comment that using a forex broker can be very important, in that what you need to do is manage that risk. So things like forward contracts, options, and various other things, and I'm not going to attempt to explain them all, but it is something that you've got to manage, both if you're between the point at which you made an offer and the point at which you buy. There can be a move in the exchange rate which will either make the thing much more expensive or cheaper. Similarly, if you're paying over a period of years on a mortgage, you're going to have that exchange risk all the way through. And so managing that risk is something that you really need to consider, which obviously doesn't arise if you're buying in your home country. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add.
I was just going to say, Nigel, one thing, and that is the same principle applies to a rental, because you'll have two other things that you'll need to consider if you're, for example, retiring to Portugal from outside Portugal itself, and that is, you will have your regular living expenses, which are in a different currency to your home market, of which the biggest chunk is probably going to be your rental if you're renting. And then the second thing is you do need to take a medium to long-term strategy in terms of managing Forex, because you may be needing to transfer your pension, in order to live in a country with a different exchange rate. So whether you're buying or renting or living, the challenge is all the same. You need multi-currency management, if you will. So that's important.
Yeah. Okay. So the just a quick question there. Somebody was asking whether we could share the recording. All of the webinars are recorded, and we will make that available. It will take me a little time to edit it, but I will probably send out links to that later this afternoon, both of today's and yesterday's webinar. So just to answer that question. So moving on to the buying process, what we would refer to as conveyancing in the UK. Having found the property, obtained a mortgage, and ready to move, what's the process in mortgage from that point, in Portugal, and how long does that process normally take?
Yeah. So with the due caveat of what I've just talked about in terms of the actual pre-approval of the mortgage, which may not have happened yet. So what the process actually is you will make an offer you'll make an offer, and there will be a negotiating process there, and there will be an acceptance in principle of your offer. So the two sides will come to an agreement. At times the properties are taken off the market. We have a process going on at the moment where a property was actually removed from the market, pending the promissory contract, which would be the exchange. And in other cases, the sellers were not willing to take a property off the market until they actually have a signed document. And this is because certain things can go wrong. So just a point, when you make an offer, or when an agent on your behalf makes an offer, you should be stipulating the key conditions in that offer. Things such as whether it's dependent on a mortgage is absolutely crucial. And it's if there's one sort of a piece of word of advice I can give in this process is transparency is absolutely crucial to your securing a property. If the seller or the listing agent feels that you have somehow changed the terms or withheld some information, for example, oh, you didn't tell me that you were needing a mortgage and now you're suddenly needing a mortgage, that is substantial material, and it can be the source of a deal falling apart. So you've got this period of doing this where an offer is subject to a certain number of terms which you've agreed. And the first step is the promissory contract. So the promissory contract is the document in Portugal which commits legally the seller to sell and the buyer to buy. The terms are pretty standard. If you give up as the seller, sorry, you're the buyer listening to this. If you give up as the buyer, you will lose your deposit. If the seller gives up as the seller, they will have to refund double the deposit, except of course if one of the subject to conditions in the contract has failed, in which case, for example, you don't get a mortgage, then there's no problem, you get your money back, as long as the seller has agreed that the contract, the promissory, is subject to your getting a mortgage. You really should be getting the promissory within 1 to 2 weeks, and the only reason it takes 1 to 2 weeks is you will have appointed a lawyer and you've given power of attorney to a lawyer, typically, and that lawyer will prepare the promissory contract, and it just typically, I mean, it's a standard document, but they normally take 1 to 2 weeks, and then sort of talking between lawyers and agreeing that and signing that. So 1 to 2 weeks to get the promissory. If everything else has been done, if you've got a bank account, if you've put your solicitor in funds and all this sort of things, and then depending on whether or not you are applying for a mortgage, the process will take anywhere between 1 and 4 months to complete. Okay, so you will typically pay 10% on exchange on promissory, as we call it, CPTV, and then there will be the whole process of the lawyer completing the due diligence, making sure all the documents are correct, you putting them in funds. If you're doing any survey, again, got to make sure that if you want the deal to be subject to a survey, you put it in as a condition, and then after all that process, the bank approving a mortgage and so on, you will then go and complete, at which stage the rest of the money goes over to the seller. Before completion, your lawyer will have paid the transfer tax on the property, because when you buy it, you've got to show that you've paid the transfer tax to the notary, and so it's sort of pretty standard stuff.
Right. And talking about the notary, what role does the notary play in the process? Because obviously people are probably not used to that in other countries.
Yeah, so it's actually very different to the notaire, for example, in France, or even to the notario público in Spain, or both of which have a bigger role than the notary in Portugal. The notary in Portugal is really sort of a semi-government appointed official. I say semi because they have to sort of be qualified and fit certain criteria, but a lot of them are actually private. They're not government employed, and what they are is a registrar of the event. So they will literally stamp the documents, read out the documents, make sure everyone's in agreement about them, and then archive or file the documents on a public register. Okay, and so that's the place where that document physically is kept. But they have a relatively small role. Their cost is small, around 500 euros, sort of 300, 500 euros. It's all on a sort of table of costs. And so it's really just the act of registering the transaction more than actually any active role. They don't have an active role as they would, you know, in France, for example. They are effectively the people taking care of the entire conveyancing process. You know, it's a bit like clearance in the US, and in Spain, the notary is a lawyer. So they're actually providing some advice to people in the transaction. This is not the case in Portugal. It's a minor role, I would call it. The lawyer plays a much more important role in Portugal.
And talking of lawyers, you know, there have been stories about people sort of taking the vendor's solicitor and using them and so on. I guess we would always say use an independent lawyer. And you know, what's your experience and view of people using how important?
Yeah, absolutely important, Nigel. I think firstly I should make clear, it is not compulsory for you to use a lawyer, but if you're a foreign buyer in a country, any country, and this is just a general rule, and I've lived in 10 countries and bought real estate in several, and sold in several, but you should be using a local lawyer, because really you're just setting yourself up for a fall that you will miss something and you will trip up and it will come back to haunt you. So we would say that the lawyer is essential. And of course, if you're going to then pay a lawyer, for goodness sake, do not use a lawyer represented by or representing the seller. There is just absolutely no sense in doing that whatsoever. You know, this is not a place where you're going to make a saving. Some of the big agencies, for example, have an in-house lawyer, and they say, well, don't worry about it. We'll facilitate all the contract. And this is not casting any aspersions about them. It's just the fact that at the single most important point in probably the biggest financial decision you will make in the new country, you're then going to rely on, you know, someone else who has exactly the opposite interests of you in a transaction. This makes absolutely no sense. Our general approach to lawyers is, and again, we work with literally dozens of lawyers across the country, is we try to tailor our referrals to lawyers depending on the circumstances and the needs of the buyer in this case. So although a lawyer can act anywhere, we do think that location matters. Because if you have a Lisbon lawyer doing a conveyancing in the Algarve, or a Porto lawyer doing a conveyancing in Madeira, for example, the travel costs involved are going to come out of your pocket as a buyer, because they're going to have to go and travel to the deed, to the signing of the deed. They may even need to go and clarify something at the local municipality, and then they're going to have to employ someone to physically go there and get the documentation, whatever. So it's just not practical. 90%, I would say, of the lawyers in Portugal do conveyancing anyway. So it's not as though it's kind of a unique skill. And therefore, if you've got a simple process, go with a lawyer that is local. I would say talk to 2 or 3, not only because you're comparing prices, but you've got to feel comfortable with the lawyer, their level of English, if you're English speaking, for example, how quickly they get back to you, how their proposal comes across, whether it's very corporate. We had this case just this week. We had a US, again, it happened to be a US client again, but there was, and they were looking at 2 lawyers up in Lisbon, and they had one quote which was quite corporate in the way that it set out, and the other quote was quite simpler, and the conversation that they had with the other lawyer was flowed a lot more easily. They found that the relationship was easier, so the costs were similar, but they went with one lawyer because there was more of a fit. So we say independence is key, and then there are a number of other factors which also apply. A good example is a lawyer that's dealt with golden visas in the past. If you're a golden visa buyer, it's absolutely crucial that there's someone with golden visa experience, because navigating CEF can be a bit of a nightmare.
Right. Okay. And talking about that sort of need to travel and so on, obviously when you're buying a property abroad, you're not always able to get to the country at critical stages of the process, so you're not living there. And you hear of lawyers suggesting the power of attorney. Is that something that you see a lot of, and is that generally a good idea?
Yeah, I would say a yes and yes. We see a lot of it because most people are exactly in your situation, and so that you also cater for any unforeseen circumstances. For example, if you think, oh, this is my house, my dream home, I'm going to make it to the signing of the deed because it's something that I feel I need to do because it's an act, and then you fall ill, or you test positive for COVID, you can't get on a flight. Well, you've got to have someone that can act on your behalf, because otherwise you could be losing a lot of money because of the fact that you can't get on a plane. So I would say for practical reasons and also for emotional reasons, sometimes negotiations when you're purchasing a property can get quite heated, and things can come up in the process which require resolution, which is sometimes not always easy or unexpected. And you want to save yourself from that sort of stress, if you will. So we recommend everyone, and it's not just us, I mean, it's just pretty common for everyone to sign a POA. And the other thing that I would say is, especially during the pandemic, we rented and sold a huge number of properties, by our standards, of course, without people ever setting foot in the country. So they entrusted the process to us. It was a process of building confidence with us as a business. We were doing things like virtual viewings with our listing agents in the case of a purchase, or with no one, or with the landlord in case of a rental. And people were signing up and doing the transaction fully remotely, both rentals and sales. And for that, you need a POA, a power of attorney.
Right. Okay. So when buying property, what are the additional costs that people need to sort of allow for when they're buying a property beyond the actual purchase price?
Right. So let me I think I have a slide on this. Let me just pull up a slide. I think I've got a slide on this, and I can just talk through it. Why is this not paging up? So this one here, so you've got closing costs. So closing costs in Portugal are, so the purchase tax, which is the next one down, is on a sliding scale of 0 to 8%. Land is fixed, although increasingly we're discouraging people from getting land because it involves planning and whatever. It's a whole topic for another time probably. And then there is a fixed property tax above 1 million. The typical range of closing costs, so that anyone can count on those, is about 5 to 8%, which is the lowest in Southern Europe. It's cheaper than any other Southern European country except Italian citizens, who have a break on closing costs, as I think citizens or second home owners, I forget now. But with that exception, anyone buying a property in Southern Europe, whether it be France, Spain, Italy, Greece, are going to pay more property tax than in Portugal, as a whole. So the transfer tax I've talked about, sliding scale 0 to 8%. The stamp duty is fixed at 0.8%. The legals or conveyancing, which we just talked about, typically 1% plus VAT. A VAT is 23% in Portugal on services. And then there will be incidentals, including the notary and miscellaneous expenses, around 500 euros. And then after the purchase, the annual cost which people will pay will include the IMI, which is the municipal tax, and that covers things such as your municipal services, taking away the rubbish, all that kind of, street lighting and that stuff. Insurance, house insurance and contents insurance if you need it, any condominium fees if you've bought in a condominium, and mortgage costs clearly if you've used a mortgage. And then I've made a comment, forget that last comment, that's not applicable to this conversation per se. So those are some of the costs that you would be exposed to and the values, Nigel.
Okay, thank you. So moving now on to the sort of rental, we've covered the sort of availability and the fact that the supply is low. We've had one question though, which is how available are long-term lets if you have pets? How easy is it to find places with pets?
Okay, so probably a little bit more difficult than without pets, but it's not the sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back. The underlying lack of availability is the real problem. I'll give you, there's no better example than we are, as I think I mentioned I can't remember if today or yesterday anyway, but we are the biggest long-term rentals player in the south of Portugal. We have a portfolio of around 250 properties, so by far the largest player, and we've built this up over many years. And I would say as our portfolio, probably around 40%, 50% of the properties allow pets. So you may say, oh, it's only half, but it doesn't tend to be a massive issue. Where there is a bigger issue is if you have more than 2 pets, that's a huge issue. We had one inquiry the other day, somebody who had 7 dogs. Well, we just said to them, I mean, you need to buy your own property because you're running a menagerie or a farm. That's not, that's like a sort of Gerald Durrell type scenario. So number of pets is much more of an issue than having a pet. And especially because we know when we work with the retiree, the pre-retiree market, often if you're single, we recognize that the pet is a companion. And therefore a lot of the landlords will recognize that as well.
Yes, we've had the same issue ourselves here in Spain, in that we didn't have any pets, but unfortunately a small kitten, a feral cat, adopted us rather than the other way around, and we ended up with a second one after that, and we could have ended up with dozens if we weren't careful. But yes, we found that rentals generally in Spain were also 2 was okay, but beyond that, not accepted. So. Exactly. Okay, so in terms of the rental agreements and so on, how do they work in Portugal? Are they very different?
So it's a regulated market in the sense of the contract. So first thing that I would say is that when you rent, there should be no one today that doesn't give you a rental contract. There's still the old stories of, oh, people didn't give me a contract, they're not registering the contract because they're not paying tax on the contract and so on. Those days are largely over, or they should be over, and we're quite strict in the application of this. Maybe let's take a step back just to understand why historically perhaps there was a bit of that reluctance, and that is that the government in Portugal has unfairly, in our view, I speak openly about this all the time, penalized long-term rentals in Portugal. The tax on a long-term rental is 28%, whereas the tax on a short-term rental, now it's higher, but some years ago used to be as low as about 3.5%. So you can imagine that someone who's presented with a scenario of a short-term rental at 3.5 or a long-term rental at 28, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what the motivations, the relative motivations of those people. That gap is closed, unfortunately, as often is the case in Portugal and in sort of Southern European economies, in the direction of greater taxation. So it hasn't been, although there has been a reduction for very, very, very long rentals, of the 28%. What has happened is the low tax, and it was extremely low. I mean, 3.5 was just, I mean, it was literally, it was party time for most people. That has gone up to now between 14 and 20% on short-term rentals. So to come back to, so that's just to set the scene as to the motivations of why you might find some people still sort of umming and ahhing about a contract, but it is actually a highly regulated environment. There are types of contracts that exist, and those types of contracts are regulated by law. Okay, so if there's ever a dispute, even if there is an error in the drafting of the wording of the contract, you can actually revert to the law. I'm not making a comment about the length of time that it may take to resolve a dispute. That's a different matter, but it is regulated by law. And there are two different types of contracts at the high level. One is called the local lodging contract, the AL, and you can actually get a rental of up to a year on a local lodging contract. It's not always the best option for a residential lease, because that lease is actually stipulated as a non-residential lease, and therefore it may not be great if you're applying for a visa. Okay, so beware of the type of lease if you're also applying for a visa. And then you have what we call the contrato di arrendamento, which is a long-term lease, and that covers a period of anywhere up to a year. So it is possible to do a residential contract of less than a year, but you have to stipulate the reason why it's less than a year. Okay, so those are the differences. We encourage people to have a contract and to sign one. In fact, we will, within our business, we won't accept doing any business without a contract, because we believe in the balance between the landlord and the tenant, and the rights of both must be suitably and balanced and protected. So, for example, we would not allow anyone to, a tenant, for example, to pay 1 year of rent up front. I mean, we just don't allow it. And no one can do that with us as a business, because we think that will expose the tenant excessively. And equally, we will not allow anyone to sort of start a rental in the summer. Exceptionally, we may have 1 or 2 stages, and if they do start in the summer, then we will require the tenant to pay multiple months up front, probably the last months, to prevent the landlord from sort of just renting out and then someone leaving after having a cheap summer rental. So we really do work to make sure that there's an equilibrium between landlord and tenant.
Right. And what circumstances can the landlord repossess the property if you're in long term? Well, first of all, can you renew it by right for a year on year? And does the landlord have the right to repossess?
Yeah, so all stipulated in law. So if it ever gets to conflict, the law will defend whichever part is right, of course, according to the law. So in answer to your question, if you've got, so this will vary depending on the length of the initial contract, but I'll just give you an example. If you have an annual contract, the law's actually just recently changed to say that the renewal will be for a further, I believe it is 2 or 3 years, unless there has been in writing a notice not to renew, and that notice period is stipulated in law. So if it's less than a year, it's 60 days, I believe. If it's up to a year, or if it's a year, then it's 90 days. If it's more than a certain period, it will be 120 days. And in answer to your first question, the landlord can't simply kick someone out. So often what people think is, oh goodness, if I've got a year's contract, for example, I've started contract in September and I've got my lease running to the end of August the following year, can the landlord come along and say that I've got to now leave so as to free up the house so they can rent short term in the summer? Impossible. The contract will protect the tenant. The landlord can certainly say that they don't wish to renew, but they can't kick you out in terms of the tenant of their tenancy. And we actually had one of these incidents and we have hundreds of rentals per year, but we have one of these incidents which was combined with COVID. The tenant was actually able to stay in the property because there was also legislation enacted in Portugal which protected tenants during COVID because they might not have been able to move elsewhere because they might have been infected and whatever. So there is a lot of protection. This is another difference between the UK, for example, and Portugal. In the UK, the landlord is protected. In Portugal, the tenant is protected.
Right. Okay. And in terms of deposits up front and so on, is it are the regulations on how much of a deposit can be required?
Right. So as far as I'm aware, there's actually not regulation that stipulates how much you can take from people, but there is a market. The market has regulated this to some degree, which is why when we find exceptions to this, we all sort of scream blue murder, as it were. The general rule is you would pay a month of security deposit and one month upfront. And then you may, depending on a whole range of factors, pay a further last month or a couple of further last months. And that has to do with that point about when you're starting a rental and protecting the landlord and so on. You may also have to pay an additional deposit if you have a pet. So you'll pay your normal deposit and an additional pet deposit. So realistically, you're looking upfront 2 months, which would be the kind of minimum standard, so one security deposit plus a month in advance, to anywhere up to 5 months, depending on the timing and circumstances. Certainly no more than that on an annual let. So 5 months would be really you are perceived to be a risk as a tenant because of your timing. 2 months is it's kind of a regular rent and business as usual. Now, I should say this, that you will find Portuguese owners in the main, they may well ask you for a guarantor, okay? And this is quite standard. So as an expat renter, companies like us, or like ours, have actually, sorry, I'm just going to have a sip of water if I may. Excuse me. Companies like ours have created, if you will, the opportunity for foreign renters to enter the market, because we spent years educating the landlords about the fact that it's very difficult for a foreign renter to come up with a guarantor, someone local, because they don't know anyone. You're moving to a new country, so you can't just sort of go and ask your neighbor via meeting them at a cafe, hey, will you sign up and be my guarantor? That's a huge risk for them if you don't pay. So clearly that's not viable. And therefore what's happened is we've created, with the help of the landlords themselves, the ability to not have to put up with a guarantee from a local person, because you don't know one. But we sometimes do lose deals on this. We had a Dutch client wanting to rent a property on a resort just last month, and the landlord was a Portuguese business, and they would not. They had an alternative for not providing a guarantee, which was to pay 5 months worth of a rental deposit, and the clients would not accept that, and the landlord would not vary those terms, and therefore, because they couldn't come up with a guarantee and weren't willing to pay 5 months up front, the deal fell apart. They didn't get the deal. So it may vary.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Liz. I think that covers that. We haven't had any additional questions in, so we'll call an end to it there. So thank you very much. Before we go, just to say again that we're here to help you make the move, and if you have any questions, if you want a referral to anybody in our network, then please just drop us a line at Expat Network, and we'll either answer it ourselves or find somebody who can. The other thing I would just like to mention is our discovery tours, and in this case it is would be Lewis and his team who would help to show you around the area. And the idea of those discovery tours is that even if you've been on holiday to the Algarve or to wherever it is you're planning to move, moving there and living there can be very different. And so the idea of the tour is to make sure you get the right property or the right location and ultimately at the right price. But it focuses not on the property, but on the area. It focuses on getting to know the area, making sure you choose the right area. If you then want to move forward, and there is no obligation to use Lewis and his team having gone on that tour. But if you then decide that you do want to buy, then clearly they will be very happy to do that. And the idea would be you would agree the terms upfront in terms of what charges would come from Lewis for his service. So if you're interested in those discovery tours, you can go to the site expatnetwork.com, look under events, and you'll see Portuguese discovery tours under there. So again, many thanks, Lewis, and
A pleasure.
and thank you to everybody for listening. Cheers.
All right.
Goodbye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye now.
Bye.